Welcome back as we continue our exploration of the mystery of Nirvana. I am a psychiatrist. I earned my medical degree from Duke University's School of Medicine and completed my psychiatry training at the University of Chicago's Department of Psychiatry, which was known for its strong psychoanalytic focus at the time. During my training, I had the privilege of learning from distinguished teachers, including Heinz Kohut, Daniel X. Friedman, William Offenkrantz, and Mort Lieberman. As a psychiatrist, my journey has been one of both scientific inquiry and personal exploration. Throughout my years of practice, I have encountered numerous individuals struggling with a wide range of psychiatric disorders, from depression and anxiety to severe mood disorders and psychosis. Many of my patients sought solutions through medication, therapy, and various forms of treatment, which undeniably provided relief, but something always felt missing. It wasn't until I started to explore the profound teachings of Buddhism and the concept of nirvana that I began to understand the deeper layers of human suffering and how the principles of nirvana might offer a path toward lasting resolution of psychiatric disorders. I began my medical career with a deeply rooted belief in the clinical model of psychiatry. My training emphasized biological and psychological factors in understanding mental illness. As a psychiatrist, I was taught to identify psychiatric conditions through diagnostic criteria, prescribe medication to manage symptoms, and apply psychotherapeutic techniques to modify behaviors and thought patterns. Over the years, I saw how effective these approaches could be in alleviating symptoms, but many patients seemed to relapse or find that their relief was temporary. This realization left me questioning whether our current understanding of mental illness could fully address the root causes of suffering. As much as I believed in the efficacy of medication and therapy, I began to wonder if these approaches were simply managing the symptoms of deeper, more existential issues rooted in human experience that went beyond biological or cognitive explanations. This thought eventually led me to explore other philosophical and spiritual frameworks that might provide a more holistic understanding of suffering and healing. It was through this inquiry that I was introduced to Eastern teachings and the concept of nirvana. In Buddhism, nirvana is the ultimate goal, an enlightened state of freedom from suffering, attachment, and ignorance. At first, I was skeptical. How could a spiritual concept like nirvana have any relevance to the psychiatric disorders I was treating? After all, my practice had always been rooted in the medical model. However, as I delved deeper into Buddhist teachings, I began to realize that nirvana is not a distant, abstract goal, but a state of mind that is attainable in this very lifetime through understanding and transformation of the self. The Buddha taught that suffering arises from attachment, desire, and ignorance. The root causes of mental anguish, whether they manifest as anxiety, depression, or other psychiatric disorders, are often deeply tied to these same forces. Our desires, whether for success, approval, or material possessions, are endless. and as we grasp at them, we find ourselves caught in cycles of dissatisfaction. The more we try to control or possess life's fleeting pleasures, the more we experience suffering. Similarly, our ignorance of the impermanent and interconnected nature of existence only deepens our sense of isolation and fear. What struck me most profoundly was the realization that many psychiatric disorders, at their core, are manifestations of these very same patterns of attachment and ignorance. Depression often arises from unmet desires or the inability to accept impermanence. Anxiety stems from a fear of loss or change, and even psychosis can result from a distorted sense of reality, where one clings to delusions or desires for control. The Buddhist path toward nirvana, releasing attachment, cultivating mindfulness, and developing wisdom, seem to offer not just a spiritual framework for understanding human suffering, but a psychological one as well. With my newfound understanding of nirvana and Buddhist teachings, I began to incorporate mindfulness into my psychiatric practice. Mindfulness, a cornerstone of the Buddhist path, involves cultivating an acute awareness of the present moment and observing thoughts, feelings, and bodily sensations without attachment or judgment. This practice of non-reactive awareness offers a way of engaging with the mind that is radically different from the conventional psychiatric treatments that focus on suppressing or eliminating symptoms. Incorporating mindfulness-based techniques into my clinical work was transformative. Instead of simply prescribing medication or applying therapeutic intervention to alter symptoms, I encouraged my patients to become aware of the underlying patterns of their minds, their desires, fears, and attachments. By observing their thoughts and feelings without judgment, they began to understand how these internal states contributed to their suffering. For example, a patient struggling with chronic anxiety might come to recognize how their constant striving for control and fear of uncertainty were fueling their symptoms. This insight, combined with mindfulness practices, allowed them to release their attachments to outcomes and embrace the impermanence of life. Over time, many patients reported feeling a greater sense of peace and acceptance, not through the elimination of their symptoms, but through a profound shift in how they related to their inner experience. A critical aspect of nirvana is the release of attachment, not just to external objects, but also to the self. In psychiatric practice, we often focus on the ego and self-concept, especially in conditions like narcissism, borderline personality disorder, and other disorders rooted in identity issues. The ego is often viewed as a core aspect of mental health, with many therapeutic models focused on strengthening the ego or helping the patient form a more cohesive self-concept. However, from the Buddhist perspective, the ego is an illusion, a construct that leads to attachment, suffering, and ignorance. The clinging to a fixed sense of self contributes to many psychiatric disorders. By challenging the rigid sense of identity, we can help patients break free from the prison of the ego and experience greater freedom. This shift is not about eliminating one's sense of self, but about recognizing that the self is fluid, interconnected, and not separate from the world around us. This realization fosters a deeper sense of peace and understanding, allowing individuals to let go of the anxieties and conflicts that arise from a self-centered view of reality. In my clinical practice, I began to see that patients who were willing to explore their attachment to the ego and cultivate a more expansive view of themselves often experienced profound healing. This process didn't necessarily require them to renounce their identity or personality, but it did involve recognizing that their sense of self was not permanent or independent. By embracing this fluidity, they were able to release many of the internal struggles that had kept them trapped in cycles of suffering. Over the years, I have come to see that the principles of Nirvana, freedom from suffering through the release of attachment, ignorance, and ego, provide a powerful resolution to many psychiatric disorders. While medication and therapy are important tools in managing symptoms, they often address only the surface level of the problem. True healing, I believe, comes when individuals are able to shift their relationship to their internal experience, cultivating awareness, wisdom, and compassion. Embracing the idea that Nirvana offers a resolution to psychiatric disorders has transformed my approach as a psychiatrist. I now see mental illness not as a purely biological or psychological issue, but as an opportunity for spiritual and emotional growth. By incorporating mindfulness, self-awareness, and an understanding of attachment and impermanence, I have witnessed profound transformations in my patients. As I continue to practice, I remain deeply committed to helping individuals find peace, not just through external solutions, but through an internal awakening to the truth of their own experience. The journey toward Nirvana, both for myself and my patients, is a path of liberation, and it is one that holds the potential for lasting healing and freedom from suffering.